You know, uh, when I was given this book by a friend from a colleague, I wasn't sure what it was about. You know, title is Ichi Ritoru no Namida, translated from Japanese. That's 1 liter of tears. And you could say that it's a sad story because this is actually real. The contents of this book are the diary of a Japanese girl, Aya. She was born in 1962 and she died 1988. She learned that she had a degenerative neural condition called spinocerebral degenerative disease when she was 15. So you can, like, she was 15 back then, just a girl going through school and everything normal. Then she learns that, hey, you're 15, like you're almost ready to be an adult, and oh, sorry about that, you've got this degenerative disease for which there is no cure. She still went to school when she was 18, but when she was 23, she was no longer capable of anything, because what that disease does, it basically destroys your brain. It makes slowly your brain certain functions degenerate. There are a number of different conditions, spinocerebral degenerative diseases, and in her case, it was something that presents around, when you're 15, just during puberty. That's when it appears, and then you have 10 years or so without more than just basic treatments. Just treating symptoms. By the time she died, she had written a couple of diaries, which are now contained in this book. That's I guess what most people would say about that is, oh, that's tragic, like, oh, if only that didn't happen, like, because she never got a chance to live her life, because by the time even before she was 20 years old, her mind had already decayed, her brain had already degenerated to a point where basic, things like just walking and just dressing yourself and, all those small things became harder and harder. It's comparable to something like Huntington's disease, where you get those tremors at some point, and it gets worse, and you begin to lose the control over your own body until you reach a point where your mind is still intact, but you no longer control your body. And some might call it unfair. Like, and that's often where where many people stray into this whole spiritual or religious terrain, where it's like, how could some omnipresent god or gods or whatever make something like this happen? Meanwhile, for a neurologist and for any scientist, it's basically like, well, yeah, you see, you've got those genes in the case of spinal cerebral and degenerative diseases. It's you inherit those recessive or dominant genes, and that means that you have this certain chance to develop this degenerative condition at this point in time. And that's stuff happens. They get the interesting question, I guess, is like, how long does a person need to be alive, need to exist, before they have lived long enough, before it's okay that they die? 70, 80, 85, 90, go for the 100. Get really happy when you make it to 120. Maybe. A story which I wrote a couple of years ago, which I've also read on my channel, called A Dying Fire's Ember, in which this girl, Kathy, gets a traffic accident. She's just a school child, just been like middle school or something. In many ways, not much older than Aya would have been when she got the diagnosis. About 15 or so. And Kathy gets told in the story, hey, that accident, yeah, the damage done to your body, to your aorta, is fatal. We can't fix that. So you just have to die. Your body is broken, and your mind is still okay, but your body is broken. So what are you gonna do? The thing with that story is that it was I didn't make it up. The story about Kathy, about the traffic accident and the doctors at the emergency room deciding that, or basically coming to the conclusion that no, there was nothing they could do about that. They could not patch her up, they could not fix the aorta, they could not fix the damage sufficiently that this girl that came into the emergency room that day, that she would have a chance of making a recovery. It's just not going to happen. Because at some point, you have got a running system which you cannot shut down. You cannot just pause it, you cannot just replace some parts and restart it and it will be fine. Even if the body is a machine with components that technically could probably be swapped out and replaced. I mean, we're doing it more and more often with new heart valves and new lens for your eyes, and the possibility of even therapeutic cloning, that you can replace more and more parts of your body with your own cells, or what we do today, swapping parts of your body out with parts cut out of the bodies of other people, but are still alive, in the case, for example, for kidneys or liver transplants. Or, well, they had a traffic accident and they didn't make it, but you can still reuse the parts. Use the heart and let's do an organ transplant. We still keep trying, but then at some point the acceptance that at some point you have lived long enough, is that really like a factual thing? Like at some point, for example, in a really interesting episode in Star Trek The Next Generation, where they had a society, this alien society, where it was normal, it was socially accepted and expected that any individual who had reached the end of their working days, say, normally when we would say, hey, you've reached this 65 years or so and you can retire. In that society, they were just like, okay, after this point, you're just going to become a burden for your family. You're just going to get old and decrepit and die. And that's bothersome for society. It costs society money, and it's just like family has to care about you and get you into a care home and everything. And it's just like, no, let's just say farewell now while you're still in a good state of mind. Which, I mean, if you begin to accept death as something that is normal, that at some point is even expected, why make such a fuss about that? Why keep trying to extend it? Why is it worse to die when you are 70 than it is when you die at 80 or 90? Why is it, what is the point of living, basically? Like, what is the value in getting those additional decades in? What is the point of living long enough to make it through school and get a job and settle down and get more offspring and, have all the grandchildren and grandchildren and then die? How much living is enough? That's... obviously, humans, like all species of animals, have this innate will, this desire, this urge to live, to survive, and to make it longer and further, and do more, and experience more. Because, in the simplistic philosophy of the selfish gene, you would say that the only purpose of life is to procreate. It is an essential part to actually keep the species going, but to the individual, it is not the whole point, one might say. To keep the species going, yes, but at the same time, you could also say that the only reason why we accept death as something normal is because there is offspring, because we accept that, some will die, but there will always be this group living on. What if you only have 2 humans left? They will never be able to procreate and get the species going again. It's very unlikely, genetically speaking. What if there's only one person left? If you have a population of a few billion and one person dies, it doesn't affect the species much. But if that person that dies is the only human left on the entire planet, that's a big deal, because at that point the species is gone and nothing keeps existing anymore. It's gone. So everything that lives inside that person's mind, that is what's still left of human society at that point. That is humanity. It's just suddenly that person being alive becomes something so precious and so meaningful in a very different way. Because that's really the contradiction you get with something when you read a book like this, or you hear those stories about young people who die in the emergency room. And you're like, tragic. You know, for the species, it doesn't matter. Like, okay, well, sucks that you didn't live long enough that you could procreate, and, you know, good for the species. But that is such a cynical way to look at things, you know, because what is the individual? Like, why? I guess the more simply put, why, when you read something like this, and why, when you hear those stories of people dying, you read those stories about those people just getting into an accident and or getting bad news about a degenerative disease or anything, and then ending up at the point where they just have to accept death. Why do we care about that? Why do we care that those people die? Why is that even in a fictional story? You know, movie or just a book? Why do we care? Why do we care that the character in a book or a movie, you know, on screen dies? I have to think back, for example, to one time in the cinema when I was watching just normal cinema, you know, back before the pandemic, when it was still the cinema and people could go there and it was full, and watching I Am Legend. And that the ending, that you actually notice, okay, oh wow, I mean, I'm tearing up. Wow, people around me are tearing up. You hear people just sobbing and crying. And you're like, this, what we just saw, was a fictional story about fictional deaths, about a world which hopefully will never become reality. Why do we care? Because we feel. Because that is one thing which maybe it doesn't make us uniquely human. Maybe it's that, you know, other species, they also care about death. Like you will see, for example, an orca mother just dragging around her dead calf for weeks. Just like with other species, they often care, you know, because with other primates, just like for humans, letting go, accepting death. I mean, we have to, but we don't want to. Nobody wants to have to accept death. I mean, we do it because of a choice we have. I mean, that was the assumption, but then of course you got science messing everything up again, because For Aya, it was late. But there have been, I think the first time in 2011, a study on spinal cerebral degeneration with gene therapy. Because that is so simple, really. Your body has one or more defective genes. Well, how about we use some gene therapy that replaces the damage or otherwise undoes the damage caused by these damaged or these wrong genes. Either cut them out, replace them, override, produce the missing protein or whatever. Using gene therapy, you can fix that. You can make it so that the body's DNA suddenly has the working, functioning, proper genes, and the person is cured. They don't have the degenerative disease anymore. They don't have to face death when they are in the 20s or 30s. That suddenly is... They don't have to accept death. And similarly, in ERs around the world, I mean, so many those conditions, like... You just have to look at, for example, just the invention the discovery of antibiotics. Suddenly, life-threatening diseases. Yeah, you take this antibiotics cure for the next 2 weeks and you'll be fine. Done. Simple. So, for that girl, Kathy, or whatever her name then is, or might be a boy or a woman or a man, who cared? Person comes into the ER with a shredded aorta, just blood pooling below the treatment bed, and they can be like, oh yeah, it's not a case like that. Let's get out this fancy magical equipment, it seems more magical for us now, but that is the thing which I think makes humans more human in a way. Like, that is this drive to it's not destroying our environment. It's about adapting to it, to learn from it, to study it, to invent new ways, better ways to deal with the realities of life, of existing. You could call it science. And in the medical sciences, especially these past decades, there are so many people alive today who would have died without the progress in the medical sciences. That's reassuring. And when you then hear more progress with gene therapy, because it really goes down to, okay, well, we can now fix those nasty microbes and viruses and other stuff that gets into you. We just get some antibiotics and retrovirals and deal with that, and you can live a normal, healthy life. We can fix those things. But actually fixing defects in one's DNA, in one's genetic material, that is something that's... It's really amazing. It's almost similar, I think, to the progress of immunotherapy. Because for a very long time, if you had leukemia, your body no longer produces... your bone marrow is basically just beyond help. And the only way to treat leukemia is to just, okay, well, we'll kill all of the bone marrow and we'll transplant some bone marrow from another person, and there might be a chance that you're still alive at the end of it, and maybe even after 5 years. And then with immunotherapy, taking T cells from the patient and essentially reprogramming those T cells to hunt down those cancer cells, which they do. And many of the patients that get treated like that, leukemia is gone. They don't have to do chemotherapy, they don't have to have bone marrow transplant. It's just get immunotherapy, spend maybe a couple of weeks on that, and with a bit of luck, it's gone. It's like, okay, gone. Suddenly the whole drama about, oh my god, I've got leukemia and this is terrible, and it's gone. And the burden that is then removed from a person. I think that is really the one thing that one can learn from such stories. The two paths essentially that you get. The one path is basically this reality in which we can do nothing, and things just happen, and it's tragic and horrible, and we can just watch. Like for Aya, that all that her mother could do at the end was just watch and be there for her daughter, even as he was getting worse and worse. And then imagine this other path where gene therapy is an option. And Aya, at 15 years old, I think I thought, oh, you've got this these bad genes, and you've got this spinal cerebral degenerative disease. No problem. We have this nice gene therapy, and it's going to fix those darn genes that are going to kill you otherwise. And then in that reality, such works, such diaries did not exist. There's a world probably not without suffering, but with a lot less suffering. I think the only thing is that some people might say, oh well, I object to less suffering in this world, because how else are we going to learn? To that I think that one can decidedly say that humans will always find a way to get other source of suffering. I don't think that we don't need to sacrifice innocent lives to horrible, degenerative or other terrible diseases and injuries. Because if that is what it takes for humans to be human, then we should just quit with this whole antibiotics and other things. No more vaccines. Just let every 1 in 6 children makes it makes it into puberty or something like that. Because that was reality until the 1940s, I guess. It didn't. 1950s was when vaccines became more and more common. And are we any worse off today? Is it that do we need suffering? Do we need death? Do we need to have this uncertainty like this sword of Damocles hanging above our heads. That's, any second, any moment, something bad could happen to one of your cells and it would turn into cancer, or you could get run over by a car, or, is that what we need? Is that what makes us human? I would argue not. I would argue that working towards this utopia, even if we'll never reach it, but at least working towards self-improvement and better understanding of ourselves, of our bodies, of the world and the universe around us. I think that is really the goal we should strive for. That is what makes us human. That's much like the children and young adults who would die every single year for so many thousands of years from all kinds of diseases and conditions that are now preventable. That's their deaths were not in vain. That we should not accept death as an absolute thing, that we should not accept disease and injury as something inevitable, that we should not accept fatalism as our mantra. That's even this horrendous word that people get so upset about sometimes of immortality, the point where aging related diseases, as we call them, they're all fixable and preventable, and nobody needs to die. That's we can at some point that we can maintain our body sufficiently that unless something really horrible happens to you, like no chance of recovery anymore. That aside from that we would be essentially immortal. And at that point, it definitely becomes an issue of how much living is enough. Because if you can live to be 1,000, 2,000 years old, why not? I mean, there's so much to do in the world, so much to learn, and everything just keeps changing, and it's fascinating to see how everything will change around you. And I guess the point that you get to then is more that perhaps the question is not how much living is enough, but why would you ever get tired of living? That's perhaps the most, I think it's the optimistic view there, that every individual is not forced into some kind of, you are male, female, this kind of background, this kind of lifestyle, which means that you have roughly, you've got still a couple of decades left, but those risk factors, like there in your family, what happened there, if that happens to you, you're gone. There's more individual freedom, I guess. I guess that is really what one gains there. And is it a bad thing? Right, at this point, I mean, you've got also the irony that you got people right now today who are like, well, I'm tired of living, like I don't want to keep living anymore. And, there were a couple of people who just, like in Australia, this man was like, well, I don't want to live anymore. And he went to Switzerland where it's legal to get euthanized when you want to. So he went there and, he's dead. So his choice. And I think that's perhaps that is the most important goal there as medical science improves, is that those who want to live, who have the will and desire to live, who are not tired of living, who have every intention of getting the most out of the life right now, today, and for as long as they intend, as they can, that they get a chance. That's everybody gets what they want in that sense, that we don't have to accept disease and injury as necessarily fatal, that we don't have to accept aging, that we don't have to just think of, yeah, well, you're 50 now, like well over the hill, and it's all downwards from here. That is so, it's cruel in a way. And this also the tragedy of having to say farewell to loved ones because of some disease or injury, or that is no longer necessary. That's less tragedy, more happiness, more carefreeness. Just like we can just let our children play outside without without worrying that, oh my God, I scraped their knee, they might just die from tetanus now. That's was actually one of the things which we used to be worried about. And I don't think that anyone was happier about it back then. It still happens today, even that there are some parents who feel strongly about about vaccines, and they choose not to have their children vaccinated. So something like lockjaw, as they call it, but when you do, but the tetanus this bacteria causes. Because the tetanus bacteria is everywhere. It's in soil, essentially. If there is soil, you can probably get tetanus from that. And if you're not vaccinated against tetanus, then, like some children, past years, some have died, some have recovered. But they can die every time they play outside, every time they walk outside, every time they get a bump or scrape or a cut, they can die. Because they're not vaccinated against simple things like that. A simple sneeze can kill you because, measles. No. Bad news. You don't want that. And we have the choice. I think that's what in the end comes down to. And even if some people make really poor choices, like the pro-plaguers, pro-pandemic people who are like, yeah, no, we don't believe science. I feel strongly that in the end, science has to win out, because science, reason, facts, ultimately that is the path we have to tread to get closer to personal happiness, you could say, because society will be fine. Society, there are enough people to keep society going forever and ever. That is not a problem. But individual freedoms and happiness, the more worries and that you can take away with a simple pill or a cure of some kind of tablets or simple injection. It's something that is giving someone their life back. And I think that is, in the end, to answer the question of how much living is enough, the only possible answer there is, how much do you want to live? How long do you want to live? Until you're tired of it. And when that is, that's up to you. I think that's... I think that is really the point where true happiness lies, because as impressive as this is, as tragic as this is, we notice just how horrible it makes you feel. Then I'm pretty sure that suffering is not the answer. And watching people die and people suffer, that is not the answer. So it's really about happy lives, living the way you want, for as long as you want, without worries. And I know that's not going to be the end of it all. This is like, I've had discussions with people, some who are really adamant that we cannot have immortality or even partially immortality. Like, if people were to live for 200 years, then there would be this overpopulation and it would be horrible. But you can already see that with as people get more prosperous and they have less to worry about, then they also start having fewer and fewer children. That's what you see in the West everywhere. Is that, I mean, or in Japan, where it's been a massive worry for ages that people just are not having enough children, you know. And if suddenly, together with there are, after the baby boom, of course, all those people retire and keeping all those pension systems going, that is tough. All those problems, fixable. Like, suddenly you do not have to figure out how to keep those people healthy and happy as they grow older with all kinds of expensive measures. No, you just give their youth back in a sense and let them decide how much living is enough for them. And as long as people are not forced into anything, it's really hard to argue with that, I would say. So, just a lot of rambling thoughts. And that's what happens when you read books like these, I guess. Because they are impressive and they make you think deep, disturbing thoughts and also some happy thoughts. And I guess in some ways they make you dream about a world, a society, a state of being that could exist with we humans, with our science, have the possibility of creating with our hands, our minds. We can create a world like that. And I think that is something that should definitely be celebrated. If you have any thoughts about that, leave it in the comments, I would say. I'll do a follow-up video or videos about this topic at some other point in time, because it's definitely an interesting one, even if it's pretty intense. So thank you for listening to this this bit of rambling, I guess. Take care. Live a happy and healthy life, or as others would say it, live long and prosper. Until next time.